You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. It's a pleasure to be back with you in this episode. I've got a guest today who's going to help us explore some ideas about helping those first-time managers that might be in your organization. Or if you're one, if that describes you, this show will be a big help to you. Her name is Ramona Shaw. Ramona, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it is a tradition on this show. I always ask my guests to kind of give a little bit of backstory about their journey to get to where you are, and more importantly, what inspires you to do what you do for other people.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard the saying, where you have the biggest mess is where you have the biggest message. I feel like I fall a little bit into that. My past is in finance, in private equity, my past career, and I started taking over a team. Was leading my former peers. And through that process of stepping into leadership and realizing, oh, wow, the things that made me really good as an individual contributor are actually not the things that are going to make me a good leader, and making a number of mistakes, probably all the mistakes that you can find in the books. As I was leading my team through that early, I want to say like 2-3 years or so on that journey, I realized how important it is to invest in my own leadership growth and learning about leadership, not only for my benefit and the benefit of the people that I'm directly working with, but also for the sort of satisfaction and alignment that I felt in my career. We were doing fine performance-wise, but I just felt too frustrated, too stressed. I started losing the joy of my work because I didn't feel like I was doing a good job. And through that process, I really dove into leadership development. I saw how that changed the way I perceived my work, my ability to work with others changed. And I was fascinated by the topic, started helping other new managers go through that journey through my own growth curve and learning experiences. And then I made that my profession, my second career. And I love doing the work that I'm doing now. It feels very rewarding to help other people, sometimes just be the mirror, sometimes be the person who instills confidence, the one who can challenge or just help others see a few steps ahead. We may think something is good and working for now, because we're doing it for the first time, and then me being able to pull from the conversations that I have across, now it's been hundreds, thousands of managers that I've worked with or trained, and to say, here's the scope of things to consider, and then here are the steps or the things that likely are gonna happen, or you want to be prepared for down the road.
I've got a similar affinity for that segment of the business world. And the way I like to talk about it is I firmly believe, and I've watched it happen through my whole career and for hundreds, if not thousands of others, we have this weird tradition in business when we think we need a new supervisor, new manager, we go out to the front line and we pick the best individual contributor. Or as we say down here where I live, the brightest bulb in the string, we pick them and say, poof, you're a manager. And there's so many things that start to evolve if the person is not given some specific training opportunity and development opportunity of what it means to be a manager/leader. The typical thing that happens for most is they get busy and they say, well, I was good at this as a contributor, so I'll just do some more of that and I'll help other people do that. Mm-hmm. And that works oftentimes to the point of getting promoted again. Now you're not a supervisor, you're a director or a manager head, department head, or some sort. And then there may be 2 or 3 more promotions still yet without this direction and development. So it's just sort of a rinse and repeat mindset that people get into. And then all of a sudden you start feeling the pressure that the organization doesn't need that from you anymore. They want other things. They want strategic thinking. They want planning. They want forecasting. They want other elements that nobody ever told you about. And you're feeling the pressure. So the normal response is to double down on what you did transactionally. And, find more sales, do more deals, deliver more goods. And, that's not what the company's asking for. So it is a conundrum, and I applaud you for identifying that, calling it out, and helping first-time people, figure this out. So let me just start with some basics. Are you usually engaged by the companies themselves, and they ask you to come in and deal with a group of new emerging first-time leaders?
It's both. So sometimes I work with companies who say, hey, this is a good time for us to train all our newer managers. We have a whole group of people. Let's work with them. Sometimes it's part of their ongoing learning development program, where every time someone gets a promotion into leadership, that is part of the promotion, and which I actually think is a really good thing to do, because they get that perk of, oh, wow, I have the privilege and I'm being equipped to be successful by attending this learning or leadership development program. And it helps them to build strong habits and set expectations early on, because it's way harder to start to change course and direction and change habits 2 years down the road. Not just for us people changing is hard, but also for everyone else around us who's getting used to the type of leader that we are. And then all of a sudden we're changing things. That's harder. And sometimes it's individuals who are getting promoted into a leadership role and recognize, you know what, working with a coach will be a really good time right now. I want to be successful here. I really care about my career. I care about doing a good job. Yeah. And, just like any athlete gets a coach, I think this is what I should do. And they reach out directly to me.
Right. So. Right. Mm-hmm. I think that is such an important message to encourage people to think about that, don't try to go it alone. Don't try to slog through. And I know, I remember all the way back in my days in the early chapters of my career, when I was appointed and assigned a management role, you immediately get hit with that sense of loneliness. It's like you've got things going on in your head, and there are not that many people you can talk to, if any, about what those things might be. On the one hand, you're afraid to admit you don't know something because, well, what does that mean? And on the other hand, you just don't know who you can turn to. And if you've got the good fortune of having some kind of support type group outside the work, then that's nice. You can talk with them. But net, it's usually a very lonely feeling when you take over that role. You're getting confronted with things you never thought you would. And all those people you thought were your peers and colleagues, all of a sudden now, in some cases, become adversaries.
Yeah, or you constantly think about, how do I maintain trust? And how do I stay credible to them as a leader, or as someone who's proving themselves in that role? Which is actually interesting that you bring that up, because when the programs that I run most of them have a social component, meaning that there's a small group of leaders who are on the same journey, maybe from different organizations, or if it's a private cohort, right, it's within that company, but they come together and they talk about specific topics as a group. And anytime I do feedback surveys and the like at the end of a program, and I ask what was one of the most valuable aspects, or what surprised you the most, it's the biggest thing by far is that social aspect, and how people benefit from hearing other people talk about their doubts, their problems, their challenges, their questions, and recognize, wow, I'm not alone. This is not just me. Yeah. This is normal. And me feeling uncomfortable, and me feeling like I'm walking on really shaky legs here is totally normal. And that doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. And it also doesn't mean I'm not cut out to be a leader.
Right.
And that is huge.
Right. People have heard me tell this story before. There was a time I was asked to come to a company and teach a workshop that the company had developed for first-time managers.
Mm-hmm.
This was a large global industrial construction company, and predominantly everybody that worked there was some kind of engineer. I mean, that was sort of the nature of the business. But they too had that need to promote up and create, frontline supervisors. So this class was to address those people, and it was like a 2.5-day workshop. And I arrived, the room was filled. There were about 60 people in the class, and we were going through the first 2 hours of this program workbook that the company had. And it was time for a break. So we took the break, and there was this line that formed at the podium. And the first person, I said, how can I help you? And he said, if everything I'm going to do is what we just covered these first 2 hours, I don't want to do it. And I said, okay, well, you're going to have to step over here. Let me talk to these other folks. And the whole line was there for that same reason.
That's so funny. Yeah.
And the reality and the magnitude of what it meant to become a manager in the organization was just overwhelming to these guys. Now, the good news was they got over that shock, and we were able to successfully work them through the rest of the process and actually get them turned around and a little more motivated to take on the opportunity. But yeah, that first dose of reality was tough.
Yeah. I often say this is for many people the biggest transition in their careers, not because it's a completely new company, right? If you get promoted within, but it's the first time and probably the only time that you really have to shift your entire mindset from how you see yourself as a value add in the company as an individual contributor is very different as the identity that you have to take on as a leader representing leadership of the organization.
Yeah.
Two very different ways to behave, contribute, and communicate, and how you spend your time as well.
How do you address the question of the difference between being a manager and being a leader?
Yeah, so that is such a popular question. I think, sometimes I'm fairly practical in my approach. And I think sometimes we're spending a lot of time trying to differentiate or define what does leadership mean versus what does management mean. And these days, where it's a lot less of this control and command, a lot less about coordinating or leading or managing someone's time, right? Where we used to say clock in, clock out, attendance rates, who is doing here, who is doing which shift, and the like. Now it's about managing tasks or managing by performance. And all that would actually fall, if we go by the books, into that category of leadership and not the management part. But anytime I speak to leaders out in the real world, the things that they talk about or my own experiences of leading, we're constantly juggling the two. Like sometimes we, by definition, are doing more leadership. Sometimes we're more of a management role. I've yet to see as someone who's actually, only a leader or only a manager, or can distinctly say what I'm doing now is only related to managing a task and not managing the people, because we're such a human-centered workforce these days. And that's what's expected of leadership, but also expected from employees.
Yeah. Usually when I engage a new client and we go into the coaching work, I'll ask that question. I used to ask the question, do you think there's a difference between management and leadership? And I've come to where I don't even start there, because everybody has learned one way or another that the answer to that question is yes, there is a difference. So that's wasted time talking about that. So I just go straight into how do you look at the difference between management and leadership, and we begin the dialogue. And then inevitably a client will ask me, well, Doug, how do you look at it? And I borrow a phrase from a good friend who is a fellow coach. He's actually happens to be in the Houston area where I am. He wrote a book about super performing CEOs, and he did a really amazing study and deep dive into about 24 really high-performing CEOs, and he was asking them that question, management, leadership, and what it all came down to is this one phrase: management is about process, leadership is about people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard that the first time, I immediately went to my own experience in business, and I realized, yeah, that's true. I have known people that are arguably good managers because they ran a good process. They hit the budget, they hit the deadlines, got the throughput, everything was clicking, but they were terrible people. Their stories often had collateral damage of high turnover rates. Team morale was not solid. There were a lot of gaps on the people side of things. But when someone steps up and asserts as a true leader, then they address a lot of those people conditions. And you said a moment ago, and I totally agree with you. In fact, recently wrote an article about it. I think command and control should be dead. And now there are certainly exceptions for command and control to be a viable methodology of leadership, but those are unique and far between. But to run a normal business environment, I think anybody that was groomed in the command and control tradition needs to rethink what you believe about leadership.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be predominantly more important, especially as we're seeing more generations in the workforce than ever before. And so more leaders will have to manage across these different generations. And that's something that often comes up with managers, usually not the new managers, but more mid-level leaders who say, I'm really good with these kind of people, or with the people who have a similar philosophy of work or work ethic. And now I have to lead people who are very different from, or see work very differently than I do. And how do I motivate them? How do I engage them? What I used to do and what used to work the last 10, 15 years seems to not work with them. And I'm confused.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that just means, beautiful, like another growth step. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means like recognize, that doesn't work here. It's all, as a leader, it's all about adapting, right? You're constantly adapting to the situation and adapting to the people you interact with. And this is just another step.
In that same vein, let me flip the script a little bit. I've had clients recently who are in that mode of, they're the younger up and coming leaders in a company, and they're struggling with being able to manage the older generations they're above them in age wise, but not above them organizationally. They're long tenured employees, but they're part of the team. And in one case I can think of, the feedback that my person is getting is that, well, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing. And so how do you typically tell people they ought to try to address that?
One of it is to not take it personally, because that will, the moment we start to think, well, this person is disrespecting me, then we probably actually make the situation worse. If we somehow feel that we need to be defensive or overly prove ourselves and be overly invested, just to recognize that's their standpoint. That's how they see it. That doesn't necessarily negate what I'm doing or what I'm here to do. And then the second part is, if you look at yourself as a product, in a way that you're, so hang in there with me as I'm productizing humans. But if you look at the value that you create in the organization as if you were a product that other people are looking to the value, like looking for the value of that product, how are you now engaging in that new group, that new peer group, which is potentially even your primary team, and then the team that you lead may be your secondary team, but it's definitely another team that you're part of. How do I become valuable to that team? And maybe it's exactly the diversity that you bring into that team that allows you to create unique value that others can't. You may be able to see things or question things or support things, or bring risks to people's attention, bring opportunities to the discussion. But it takes some intentionality. It takes a moment to sit back and think, yes, how do I show up? How do I add value How do I engage with these people so that I'm being heard, or I even adapt a little bit to the language that they speak? If for them, timeliness and being prepared is really important, or following protocol or processes is really important. Don't be too authentic in that moment. This is the moment to say, like, okay, I'm going to honor that. I'm going to show up on time, well prepared, because that will make me be able to form a stronger relationship and work with them better, because I'm adapting my style to better meet them where they're at.
I agree with you. I think step one is not get combative in that situation. Don't go on the defensive, and don't launch a counteroffensive, but rather see if there's a common ground that you can get to where that, elder, more seasoned person is, you express value to them. Mm-hmm. That the fact that you're counting on them for certain things, and yes, you are well aware of their experience and their background, and you would like to, engage them to be part of the bigger picture that you're trying to build. And I think it really is a challenge to avoid, being defensive or let it take it all personal, because that's it's kind of the beginning of the end if you go that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they know exactly. They got to you if you show that.
Yeah, and that in fact is often the thing that deducts from the credibility. When we're looking at leaders, when senior leaders look at the sort of the newly groomed leaders in an organization, they're not assessing them by how well they do when things run smoothly, right? If they have a high-performing team, everyone's super engaged, their projects are on time, all that, that's great. It's good signals, not neglecting that. But really what boils down to is what will happen? What will this leader do when they get angry or frustrated, when someone on their team quits out of the blue, when that person has an underperformer they need to manage, when a project fails, when an interpersonal conflict arises? How are they going to manage themselves, and how are they going to support and lead their team through those challenging moments? That's really when eyes are going to be on the leader, and people will watch and see how well they're handling it. And those are the things where any leadership training is helping those leaders prepare for those situations, so that they have a game plan, they have some resources and tools and a support system in place, that when this stuff happens, this is not the unexpected, unprepared situation that they're finding themselves in.
It's not if, but when. Yeah,
exactly.
I agree with you. That's a very good observation, that when things are running well, there's very little attention to what you're doing as a leader. But when things blow up, that's when everybody wants to know what you're made of and what you're capable of doing. I like that.
Yeah, and it's sometimes leaders try to prevent these situations, and I often say, you can't. Like, someone's going to quit. You're going to make a wrong hire. You're going to find yourself with an underperformer at some point. You're going to, launch a project or an initiative that's going to fall flat. That is, like you said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So don't get caught up in that. But when that happens, what will you do? How long will you tolerate an underperformer or someone who brings some toxicity to the team? What are you going to do when you notice you made a mishire? Are you going to rethink the hiring process? Or are you just going to say, well, other person's problem, that was not me to blame? What will you do? And that's really what the gold lies.
It reminds me way back once upon a time when I was a young officer in the Army just getting started. I had a senior officer that took me to the side and said, he said, "Thorpe, I got a thing for you." He said, "The Army doesn't expect much out of lieutenants, so I'm going to advise you to just work really hard, do a good job, keep your nose clean, keep everything working right. But when the time is right and you see an opportunity, you need to screw something up really big time, and then they'll pay attention. And you don't need to do something that's illegal or immoral and get you in trouble, but just something you blew up, messed up. and they'll start looking at everything you've done and realize you're a damn good officer. So we ought to hang on.
That's so interesting.
I think I counted as smart enough at the time to say, well, thank you, sir, for that advice. I'm not sure I'm going to do it that way, but
that's so funny. Yeah.
Anyway, well, I'll tell you what, Ramona, it's time to take a quick commercial break here in this show. We're going to do that, folks. And when we come right back, we've got a lot more to cover. So hang with us. We'll be right back.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to dougthorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to dougthorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's dougthorpe.com.
All right, everyone, we're back. You are listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm Doug Thorpe, and today I'm visiting with Ramona Shaw, and we're talking about ways to help first-time managers and leaders be successful in their role with that new experience that they're embarking on. One of the things, Ramona, that I hear a lot of, and you mentioned it during the break, is this idea of confidence. I think when someone steps into that manager role for the first time, generally your confidence takes a big hit. Stuff starts swirling, you start doubting yourself, you hear things, people say things, you're unsure, you're unclear, and boy, that whole confidence thing really kicks in. So what do you typically tell people how they can strengthen that confidence?
Yeah, well, and just like you said at the beginning, sorry, I'm going to scratch that. Yes, like you said, the moment when someone moves into a new role, anytime, be this a first leadership role or just taking on a new responsibility or a new job, it's the fact that we're making a step. If you look at sort of a bar chart here, and there's this pillar up here is the outer success, the success that we can measure on the outside. And this is our inner self-worth. Whenever we do a job for a while, we start to feel really good about, we think usually we're doing a good job. We can do this. We get positive feedback. So the outer success, our job role or our title matches how we feel about ourselves in this role. But then we take on a new job, and then naturally there's a gap in between that level of self-worth here that we had job related and that new outer success, so that new title that we got. And this gap is where oftentimes the imposter syndrome or the self-doubt starts to kick in very naturally. So the first thing is that I want to say is anyone who feels, out of their spot, that feels a little bit out of their comfort zone, that this is normal. This is part of the journey. It just means you're growing and you're expanding. And like I said earlier, before the break, it doesn't mean that you're not doing it right. It just means you're new to something, you're growing and you're learning. And then when, as you're going through this and you're starting to practice certain things, or you get better and you expose yourself to new and uncomfortable situations, you'll naturally get more confident because you're getting more competent along the way. But the thing that puts that spiral or that ball, gets that ball rolling, that confidence ball, the more competent we are, the more confident. The thing that gets that rolling is courage. And we need to put courage into play in order to act. And that's the thing to really work on. Courage comes up when we look at fear and we consider, or we take a step back and we realize, I want to do something, or I want to say something, or I think I should maybe make a decision here, but I worry about it being the right thing, or I worry about not making other people happy or someone else being upset with me. And so I'm holding back. Any of those moments, it's really important to ground yourself in your leadership philosophy, in your values and your principles, and then act in a way that's in alignment with who you are, not what your fear tells you, but who you are and who you want to be as a leader. And in order to overcome the imposter syndrome or self-doubt, my first tip is always ground yourself. What are your values? What are your principles? Who do you want to be as a leader? And then embrace the discomfort, but make decisions and act that's in alignment with those principles and your leadership philosophy.
I like that. I like that dynamic you've described about the confidence, competence, and courage. One of the things that comes to my mind in terms of how do you trigger and activate that courage part, it's one thing to sit at home and think about what it means to be courageous in your new job, but it's another to put something into action. And one tool that I've advised people to do in those new roles is get really busy and develop for yourself and for your team a 100-day plan. Start thinking really about what can I really accomplish in my first 100 days, and then make it evergreen, keep rolling it over as time advances. And I was talking with a client a couple of years ago who, in the middle of our coaching, had the opportunity to apply for a VP job in his company. And he would have been if selected, he would have been the youngest VP in the whole company. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of anxiety about going forward. And we talked about this 100-day plan idea. And he took it one step further. He got busy even for the interview process. He presented his 100-day plan. And he was interviewing with the COO of the company, and this is a publicly traded company, so this is the kind of stratosphere we're talking about. Mm-hmm. He was interviewing with the COO, and he laid out his plan, and he explained it, and he presented it, and the COO said, "Damn, pack that up, come with me." And they went next door to the CEO's office. Nice. He says to the COO says to the CEO, he said, "Look at this plan. This is what you and I have been talking about. We have our guy. Let's stop the presses." And so they selected him to be the new VP.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he, he was able to then, implement that plan. And were there holes in the plan? Sure. There was a lot of stuff he didn't know about the scope of what he had before him, but he knew enough about the department and the company and the strategies and the values that he could talk smartly about a plan. And coincidentally, that's apparently what the COO and CEO had already been envisioning for where they wanted to go. And here he was ready to do it. So
sweet. Yeah. Well, that's demonstrating that strategic thinking. And I would add to that, especially related to the self-doubt or the confidence, is one is, like you said, that getting busy and making a plan helps people feel more grounded and have more clarity, and love that. And then if you start thinking about all the things that could go wrong, and you start thinking about what would be the contingency plan for when that goes wrong. So what if we're delayed on that project? What if I'm losing resources? What if there's a budget cut? What will I do then? And will we still achieve it or not? And what are these different dynamics? When these things then happen, or if we get nervous about one of these things because we see there's a risk is increasing, we feel so much more prepared because it's not out of the blue. No, we've already thought about it, and we'll act a lot more confidently in those situations as a result of it.
Yeah, I like that. Well, what are some of the first steps that these newly appointed leaders can think about to kind of shore up and create their own success in the new role?
Yeah, so what I usually suggest for people to do who are early in or just getting promoted in the first 30 days, it's, on one hand, it's obviously learning. Have a really good listening ear, asking questions, being curious. But then two, investing in relationships. And I don't just mean go take people out for lunch, but I really mean do a team analysis. Look at the team that's in front of you. Talk to people about their unique strength, their unique positioning, mm-hmm. about their career goals, about, what they think goes well and what's not going well. What are their barriers and hurdles and struggles? Look at your stakeholders, map those out, try to identify what are people's goals, what are they working on, and what can you learn about their style, their preferences, observe them in meetings to try to pinpoint what are they going for, who do they seem to resonate with or connect with well, or where there might be some friction. get that lay of the land early on in building relationships, but mapping out the relationships as well.
Yeah.
And then the next thing would be to set really clear expectations. And I'm curious to hear, but you've probably seen this many times, right? We have a situation at hand, something is really challenging, and then we look at it deeper and we ask some questions and we realize they had two totally different expectations. And they've never talked about the expectations. And then there's the explicit expectations, like actually goal setting, what are we measuring? What does success look like? And then there's all the implied expectations of, how do we work together? What is expected now with hybrid teams? When should we be present? How quickly should we respond to emails? I recently did a workshop with a team online about team norms. And I asked them, I set up a poll and I said, what do you think is an appropriate and respectful time to respond to a coworker's email? And, it was just jaw-dropping for people to see that some people thought it was 2 hours and others thought it was 2 days. Others thought it was 2 days. But that's what we then work with in an organization. So aligning on expectations is so key early on.
Yeah, that whole idea of expectation and with that, right, associated with it is the notion of obligation. Well, you've got all these expectations, all right, fine, but what do you think your obligations are to help make that happen? And that's a two-way street. That's between the leader and the employee. So having that discussion, I did a whole episode last year. A guy named Seth Silber joined me, and if you want to go back in the archives and look for it, the title of it is Two in a Canoe. It was a great discussion about this expectation obligation dynamic, and in one form, it's kind of contract 101 if you want to think about writing contracts. Mm-hmm. Because both parties come to the table with expectations, but part of what you put into the contract is obligations. All right, to achieve the expectations, what are you going to obligate yourself to do? And it goes both ways. Again, both parties line that up, and it's a perfect word picture for what leaders need to be doing with their people. Number one, it's the clarity of those expectations. Every employee you hire, I promise you, comes to work with a set of expectations. I want to grow. I want to learn. I want to get promoted. I need to make more money, whatever. And it's combinations of all of those things. And if you as a leader don't understand what those might be, you're missing the opportunity to really get some extra effort out of that person. Because if you can understand and demonstrate true understanding and empathy for those things and help that person achieve those things in the boundaries of what you're able to do, you've got a win-win all the way around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's not on the leader to have this crystal ball to, and figure it out just by observing another person. This is all about creating the space and time, the format to have these conversations, to ask and to capture it and write it down, and setting those goals or have these conversations with every single employee, and then taking a step back and looking like, okay, with that in mind, how do I need to show up for each of them? And then how do I allocate tasks, or how do I build a team dynamic or work with this team dynamic so that I'm keeping people motivated? It's like people who join are usually like, we spark the little match. Everyone's super motivated. We light the fire. It's like this big fire. It's great. But then we have to keep throwing in logs into the fire to keep that fire going.
Keep it going, right?
Keep it going. And if you don't know the answers to these questions that you just listed, gosh, this is going to be a tough fire to
well, and we could probably do a whole other episode, you and I may make myself a note to talk about that down the road, but I know you do a lot of work in the whole idea of building trust at work, as do I. And, one of the cornerstone or foundational premises of my work for trust is the idea of being able to ask and answer questions. Mm-hmm. And I use the very simple analogy when we are growing up and we start getting interested in dating other people, when you go through that dating process, what are you doing? You're trying to build trust. And how do you do it? You fundamentally ask a bunch of questions, and it starts with little things like, what's your favorite color? What kind of food do you like to eat? Where do you like to go? What kind of music do you like to listen to? And you start building, and then you get into the deeper life questions. What's your religion? How are you raised? All those kinds of things. And ultimately, you're ticking off little boxes in your mind saying, I can connect with this person. We align on so many things. Look at this, all these things we align on. And that builds that level of trust to finally say, hey, would you like to live the rest of our life together? That's it seems like we're a good match for that. And as corny as that may sound to some, that's essentially what the relationship is with the employer-employee. You need to have that kind of trust and understanding, but the only way you're going to get there is going through that series of questioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes where leaders struggle, and naturally, I totally understand that too, is that we think because we're representing the organization in a way, is that, well, anything that we talk about here in terms of career and what they need and how I can support them needs to fit within that box of the organization. And I think this is where, one of the things we have to shed, that thought we have to, or that belief we have to let go of, because in that control and command era that we've talked about earlier, that kind of worked, right? It had to be within that box of the organization. But when it becomes more people focused and human centered, then it's not about that organization. It is about the relationship. And when it's not transactional, but it's relationship based, then that goes beyond the organization. So I may have someone who says, maybe have someone on my team who says, I actually am really interested in becoming a better writer. And so I would say, that's not part of what we do here, but how can I support you? What do you need in order to pursue that interest? And then when you do, where do you see a way that skill could actually be leveraged in the organization? Would you like to, support our PR department on some of the writings that they do? Would you like to observe them or shadow them? Now we're finding an overlap between their personal interests as well as the organizational interests and or goals, and that is golden. Or if someone says, I want to in the future become a director or a VP at a publicly traded company, we may not be the company that is the right path for them, but we can then pinpoint, great, if that is your career goal, how can I support you? And we make this engagement here part of your next, it is one next step or the next few steps on the way there, but I am in for your success to get all the way there. I'm not just interested in you performing for me today. I'm building a relationship, and I want you to trust me that I have your longer term success, top of mind, and I'm interested in helping you get there as much as I can within that role and within that time frame.
Well, Ramona, one last area I want to ask you about is the change in the current work environment. You've alluded to a couple of things as we've talked here today, but just asking you specifically, for all the time you've been doing what you're doing, and pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, virtual work, return to work, all of that stuff that's going on in the real world today, what other things do you see shifting and changing in the way people are coming to work, expecting to work, that drive what a leader needs to be doing?
Such a good question. I think there is definitely an aspect of maybe something I've changed my mind on too over the last few years, that aspect of personal relationships, that I think in a time where we had a lot more social connections just by, being in the office and being around people, or going to meeting friends up for lunch because we're all working in the city, or having happy hours and the like. I think with the the fact that we have, and we work more globally or just spread out and have remote employees and so forth, or some of us working from home, the fact that we're looking for more flexibility and we're not all working exactly at the same time or at the same days, I think that creates an increased need for people to feel more or have stronger relationships in the workplace with the people that they work with. And I used to think that actually personal relationships could get in the way of having an effective team or leading well. I still think having personal relationships is really tricky. I just see this, and I see the ugly side of that. Choose too much to let that go. But I do think that that's something that we have to really pay attention to. The social connections and social relationships that people form in the workplace are important. And what can we do through, offsites or events or team building sessions? How can we foster trust in the team, even if we're not in the same location? I think that's something that's going to be really important, and managers need to pay attention to that going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the jury's still out on exactly what the bottom line is going to look like. But you've captured all the critical issues that I think everybody is dealing with out there. There are still company owners, executives that are struggling with how to declare their desire for return to work. I had a recruiter on this show a couple of months ago, and he said when client companies come to him and say, we're looking for Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, back in the office, he as a recruiter says, I don't do that. It's a non-starter. I can promise you I can't find anybody that's going to fill that job. So we don't even have an opportunity here.
True. Yeah.
And he said there have been companies that have approached him with exactly that request, and he's turned them down, and they've thought he was crazy for doing so. And he said, I tell them I'm just speaking reality. I can promise you none of my candidates want that kind of boundary anymore. They want the hybrid work. They want the flexible opportunity. They do have a desire to get into the office at some degree, but it's not that 100% model that we used to have. So it is a changing world. And I've begun thinking in terms of when we look at global history of business, we think about the automation of work going all the way back to the creation of the cotton gin to improve farming. And then we get into the so-called industrial revolution when you got the big factories, and then we had the technology revolution. Well, I think we're in what is now the human revolution. I think the people side of business is coming back around to be front and center of how leaders and company owners need to think about work.
Yeah.
And I think the ones that solve that equation sooner are going to be far more successful than others. And there's that in and of itself might be a whole other show we can get into and talk about, but it's no doubt a big challenge out in the business world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something about finding that middle ground and walking that tightrope between, yes, this is about being human-centered and sort of that conscious approach and building the relationships and the trust and how to attract the different generations and adapt to the new needs of the workplace. And on the other hand, still, how are we not getting distracted by all that from pursuing our actual purpose and driving performance and the business goals? Because this is a business. This is not a community there for the sake of the community. We're here for a business purpose. And I'm personally very results focused. And so I constantly see that tension as well. And I experience it in my business and see it otherwise. How do we walk that tightrope so we're not swinging like the sinus curves, it's like, whoa, all the way until we finally find, the right balance. And I think that's a little bit of where we're in. It'll be interesting to see where we land.
Yeah. If there's ever been a time where the art versus science of leadership needs to be balanced, We're there now. We're there now. There's a lot of what you described in my mind. It requires a lot of art of leadership,
Yes.
not just the science of leadership. So, well, Ramona, thank you so much. This has been great. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
Yeah, my website is ramonashaw.com. I have a book on Amazon. It's called The Confident and Competent New Manager. And otherwise, LinkedIn will be probably a good place as well to connect as well.
Well, good. Well, as always, folks, we will have that information in the show notes so you can get the live links for all of that by dropping down into the show notes here. And one last time, Ramona, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Doug.
I can't help but not to contradict or overshadow, but I want to remind everybody that my first book was actually about first-time managers. The title of it is The Uncommon Commodity, a common sense guide for new managers.
Love it.
It was my first book and a work of love. For no particular reason, I've kind of evolved my own practice a little bit more to the more senior executive and company owner types, but all along the way, I always remind those guys they need to worry about their frontline managers. So I'm still a champion of that. I just don't do necessarily the direct early emerging leader type work that I once did. But nonetheless, that book is still out. It too is available at Amazon, and there's links all over my website if you want to get to that. But one last moment of thought. I want to remind everybody, if you're listening on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check us out. And for now, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you for listening in. I hope to see you again real soon.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.